Hey there, BookTube, welcome back to my channel. March is over and I'm gonna tell you about the 18 books. Yep, 18 books that I read in March. Stick around. First book that I read was Things We Lost in the Fire, stories by Mariana Enriquez. These stories were set in Argentina and they focused on female characters who had all lost something or had given something up and how they were dealing with the losses. I gave this 4 stars. Next up was We Need New Names by Novalet Bulawayo. The story was set in Zimbabwe and it followed Darling, who is 11 years old when we meet her, and her friends and the dreams that they have about moving to America. And then it followed her progress as she immigrated to the United States and what her life became compared to the life of her friends who either stayed in Zimbabwe or moved or immigrated to other countries. This book is an example of the Bildungsroman genre where you see a character going through various life stages. I really enjoyed the immigrant experience that this author portrayed in the book and I gave it 4 stars. The Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel features 2 cousins, Lane and Allegra, who have grown up together in their grandparents' house. After some time, Lane has moved out and Allegra has gone missing, and she is called to return to the family home to try to figure out her cousin's disappearance. There was a lot that I didn't like about the story, so in the end I gave this 3 stars. Seth Godin's Purple Cow was my first nonfiction for the month. This was about different techniques that you can use to make your business or your product just more remarkable and gain more attention from the people that you're trying to pitch your product or your idea to. I gave this 4 stars. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson features a pair of twins, Noah and Jude. They've been very close to the point where they can't play rock, paper, scissors because they always come up with the very same response. When they become teenagers, they feel like their parents are now demonstrating favoritism towards one or the other child. So the father chooses the girl and the mother chooses the son. As these children start to struggle in their relationship with their parents and try to figure out who they are aside from their parents' approval, they also resent their sibling for the affection and attention that they're getting from that other parent. I really enjoyed this. I love the way that the narrative moved between perspectives and timelines, and I ended up rating this 4 stars. And this was the first book that I read for the Read-A-Rama Readathon. Happiness Like Water by Chinelo Okparanta. The stories begin in Nigeria and they follow characters who are dealing with various female issues. Like there is infertility and the pressure to have a child, otherwise your husband will disown you. There are arranged marriages. Some of the characters are dealing with things like homosexual tendencies in a traditional society that does not embrace this alternate lifestyle, people who are dealing with poverty and lack of employment and lack of opportunities to help their family. Then we see the characters moving away from their country, immigrating to the United States. And even though the stories weren't linked, there are elements that move from one story to the next, so the book transitioned in a pretty fluid way. I ended up rating this 3 stars. Kimberla Lawson Roby's novella, Best Friends Forever, was a short book that I picked up to participate in a readathon. The novella focuses on a couple experiencing marital difficulty where the husband is intent on leaving his wife, even though she develops a disease. I ended up giving this 2 stars because the writing was just not on par and there was no mystery and there was no intrigue. Even though it was a novella, there was a push at the end to resolve things, and so there wasn't a really good pace, and so I ended up rating this 2 stars. I don't think I'll pick up another book by this author. I don't often give 2-star ratings, which is why the fact that I rated the very next book 2 stars is also mysterious to me. The Testament of Mary by Colm Toibin is on the short list for the Man Booker Prize in 2013, and you'll remember that I'm doing a challenge where I'm reading a lot of those books. And this was pretty short. It was only 80-something pages, but I hated almost every one of the 80-something pages. The narrative is supposed to be giving an alternate version of Mary, the mother of Jesus. It paints her as an unbelieving kind of harsh character who doesn't really get along with anyone in her family. Her son, she's not close to her son, and she is very suspicious of the things that are being done around her. There's no divinity connected to her, and her testament is supposed to be skepticism about the whole idea of Jesus's divinity. I just didn't like it. Separate and aside from my religious beliefs, the character in here was very unlikable. and she did nothing to endear herself to me or to make me understand or believe her story. So I gave this another 2-star rating, and I don't think that I would recommend this to anyone. But if you've already read it, let me know what you thought about this one. I also read the short poetry collection entitled Nevermind, 20 Poems and a Story by Taha Muhammad Ali. These stories were set in Jerusalem and Palestine. The author is a leading poet in the Palestinian literary scene. This was a really short read that I read for a readathon as well. Right after the Read-A-Rama readathon ended, I started a brand new readathon, which was to read borrowed books. And The Wrath of the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh was the first book that I read for that readathon. The Wrath of the Dawn is a young adult retelling, kind of inspired by the fairy tale 1001 Nights. And I thought that this was just such a fun story. There were things that I didn't like about it. It involves some kind of a love triangle, which is not a plot that I am particularly drawn to. But this one was different because it involved so many other kinds of stories. And I fully intend to read the sequel to this story. I gave this one 4 stars. Second book I read for the readathon was the Percy Jackson Lightning Thief graphic novel, and this one was not an enjoyable read, and so I gave this one 2 stars as well. I received The Barrowfields by Philip Lewis in order to do a review from Blogging for Books, and I really enjoyed this read. This is one of those bookish books where this young man has ambitions to become a writer, but through his process he's examining his father's life. His father was also a writer. And there are lots of literary references that made this book very interesting, but also the writing. The prose was also very fluid and well expressed. And even though I didn't love everything about the story, I enjoyed reading several parts of it. So I gave it somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5 star rating. I read #Girlboss by Sophia Amoruso. In this memoir, she shares the tales of her childhood, her teenage years, where she was not very motivated and she did a lot of odd jobs, but was also a thief and a dumpster diver and all of that. But she transitioned her passion for vintage clothes into this multi-million company called Nasty Gal. So her story was very inspiring to read, and I gave this a 3-star rating. We're almost there. The next book I read for the readathon was Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. This was another kind of bookish book where the story takes place in this bookstore that is owned by this guy called Mr. Penumbra. And so the main character that we're reading is a clerk in the bookstore. It's a strange bookstore because the section where there are books for sale seem to be a front for something else that is going on in this bookstore. So that was very interesting, and I gave this somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4-star rating because there were so many elements that I really enjoyed, but there were also things that didn't get explained in the end, and I felt like there was a little bit of a fan fiction for a book that I had never read that might have made some parts of it a little confusing, but overall I enjoyed reading it, and I read it during the 24-hour readathon. Another book I read during the 24-hour readathon was The Art of Social Media by Guy Kawasaki and Peg Fitzpatrick, which is about tips that you can use to boost your social media presence and how effective you are at getting followers online and communicating with your followers about your product if you are in business. This is not a brand new book, so there were things in this book that I knew already, but I still found things that were pretty interesting to read. I gave this 3 stars. Last book of the readathon was Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This follows these high school sweethearts, Ifemelo and Obinze, the Z. But it follows these 2 characters who meet in school in Nigeria, and they are high school and college sweethearts. And after college, they kind of go their separate ways. Ifemelo comes to the United States, and the Z, he goes to England. The story is about their relationship and whether or not it persists after they've been separated by time and distance. There were things about this book that I really enjoyed. I think this author is very gifted with her characterization and her writing style, but I didn't love the characters. There were choices that the characters made that I just did not love, did not appreciate. During the reading, I was convinced that it was going to be a 5-star read, but towards the end, I realized that it wasn't a 5-star. So I changed my rating to 4 stars. I got this book to do a review, and the cover is very misleading because when you look at it, this mass market paperback, it looks like just a regular Harley Quinn romance. It says on the side HQN, which is Harley Quinn romance, but the story itself was not Harley Quinn level. As a matter of fact, this is the first in a series that is set on a Montana family ranch, and it followed these characters who were just involved in so many different things. The fact that it was a series meant that all the subplots were not resolved, but they were pretty interesting subplots, so they felt like things that I would want to continue reading, except that I'm not a big fan of series, so we'll see. In the end, I gave this a 3-star rating. And we did it. The last book was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I got this one in just as the month was wrapping up. I've been postponing reading this book for several months. I was waiting to try to get my own copy. When Colson Whitehead was doing book tours, I really wanted to meet him and get him to sign my book. I eventually got this copy from the library because I'm still holding out. I still want to meet this guy. So these are just some of the 18 books that I read. This was my best reading month since I've been on BookTube, and I'd love to keep it going. So let's see how many books I can read in April. Thanks for watching my video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll talk later. Until then, happy reading.